Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining my session. My name is Eran Bibi, and I'm the co-founder and chief product officer of Firefly. And in the past decade, I'm doing DevOps as an hobby and also as my profession. And today's talk will be about some of the lessons I learned while writing infrastructure as code, specifically in Terraform, by embracing the immutable infrastructure concept. So let's start with understanding what is immutable infrastructure. So the concept saying that you cannot change or alter any configuration after you are provisioning a server. And it's very different than the traditional way of provisioning infrastructure where you provision a server and then keep patching it and changing the configuration over time. By having immutable infrastructure, you can enjoy a lot of benefits, like keeping everything consistent. And also, you are getting more predictability about what is going on because everything is the same. And in case you have some issue, you just need to create a new infrastructure and you don't need to worry about the changes between the servers that you have or the setting that you have in place. And as Bernie says, new is always better. Okay, let's dive into the details. So in this section, I'm going to show you a few of the tips. I'm going to use Terraform as the main language for infrastructure as code in my example, but some of the tips are relevant for other frameworks like Pulumi and CDK. The first one is a very basic pattern of using models. So instead of having a huge Terraform file describing all of your application and infrastructure in a single place, you can split it into smaller parts and then reuse them. So if I need to describe in few words what is models, models are smaller pieces of infrastructure as code that you can share between projects. And if you want to get the idea of how models look like, you can see in this diagram. So you have the main project. This is the root model. This is what you are doing as a default. But if you would like to have smaller pieces and reuse them in few separate use cases, you just create that directory called models, and then you even can create a child model inside. So a child model can be that networking piece or the storage piece, everything that you can reuse in other projects. So by embracing that practice, you're basically going to the other suggestion that I have is to use the dry pattern. Do not repeat yourself. So try to minimize the duplication of code when you're writing. Even if you are going deep dive into one project and you think you will be done after completing that project, think about going ahead and you will assume that infrastructure changes happening only on a certain level of or certain resources. So make sure to create that logical separation between the resources so you will minimize the risk. If you are writing some change, you don't want to take the risk that if you are putting a typo or something that you missed in your pipeline will damage the entire application. You want that the blast radius will be small as possible. So try to create smaller pieces and you reuse them whenever you can. Another tip that I have for you is keep everything consistent. So before you are creating your first project, just do the reading and understand what is the best practice for naming convention and try to keep everything in the same convention. If you are using variable, which is highly recommend, just to make sure what is the right order to use them. And if you are inherent resources from place to place, make sure that you are doing it in the right in the right place. And also about the use of the models. So you can use out-of-the-box models that you can find in Terraform registry, but you can create new one. So before just writing a lot of code by yourself, make sure that you can make sure if that code can be available for you already written in the web. My next few tips will be regarding Terraform state file. And if you are familiar with the Terraform architecture, then you know that state file is the persistent way to keep the current state of the cloud. So Terraform will know how to create new plan once you are introducing a change to your cloud. So if you are a team with multiple people that using Terraform against a certain type of infrastructure, you should use remote state. And Terraform providing a backend service that can help you to save the state in remote location. I personally prefer the S3 bucket as the place to save the TF state file. And this is what taking me to the next point of you need to make sure you are backing up the state file. So because the state file is so crucial in the piece of having a healthy Terraform deployment, you need to make sure that you always keep in a backup of the specific state file. So if you are using S3 as I did, you need to make sure that you are turn on the versioning in the S3 bucket, and then you have that peace of mind that you can always go back to the previous revision of the state file in case there is some disaster of something happened to the state file and you need to go back. The next tip is to use the state locking. So we started with understanding that Terraform is something that you can collaborate with other team members. So you need to make sure you know how to handle a situation where multiple people trying to provision and introducing changes into the infrastructure in the same time. And this is why there is a feature called state locking. So if you are using S3, you need also to use DynamoDB in order to manage the lock. So the entire locking mechanism is just to prevent that situation where two people trying to write to the same file in the same time. So if someone doing a change while Terraform is writing the state file is basically locking it for changes, the other team member will get a message that the state file is locked, and there is no situation where two people write into the same file in the same time. The next tip is try to avoid situation when you are manually changing the state file. So as I mentioned, state file is only a JSON file and it's human readable, and you have the power to edit it and remove lines and add lines. But this is a bad practice, and what will happen when you will manually change the state file is basically a place for a lot of errors. So if you are in a situation when you would like to import new resources that you are not managing Terraform and you like to make them manage, just use the Terraform import command. So I didn't face any situation that required a manually modification of state file, but I heard about a lot of people that tried to do that in some cases, and they ended up with a corrupted Terraform deployment. Next, I highly recommend you to use Terraform data block. So the data function is basically a fantastic way to get information out of the cloud provider APIs. It can be the cloud provider or other provider that Terraform uses. But the thing is, you just think about it as a query language that you can use to get information from the providers. And I can give you a very quick example of a great use of data calls. So if you have a model and you have an hard-coded list, for example, I would like to have a list of the availability zones. I put them in the file. So this list is basically statically handled, and each time there is a change in the availability zones, I need to do a manual change. But if I will use the data block, I basically having a call to the cloud using the provider. And in this case, I will use a call called AWS availability zone. And I will give it a property called state available. And basically this data block will get the list of AWS availability zones which are available in a dynamic way through the API of the cloud provider. So the only thing I need to do is just to create that variable, the availability zones, and put the value of the data call. So this is just an example, and a data call also allow you to share information between projects. So if you will use it wisely, you will find that data calls is a powerful feature in Terraform. My next tip for you is don't bypass the infrastructure as code pipeline. So when you are creating an infrastructure as code, it's basically a committing to a certain way of provisioning infrastructure and then infrastructure changes. While it's very easy to go to the cloud console or to use the CLI or API of the cloud, all of the changes from now on have to be through the infrastructure as code pipeline. So do your best and put those safety measurements in order to make sure no one can alter and change the infrastructure directly from the cloud. And this has got me to the next point of you should understand that even if you will put those safety measurements and try to do everything for education and behavioral change in your team, you need to make sure that you are monitoring for infrastructure drift. And just to make sure everybody here understand what is infrastructure drift. So drift is when your infrastructure becomes different than the one you described in your infrastructure as code manifest. So it's mainly because somebody doing a manual change, but it's also can happen by a third-party application like a CSPM machine that also writing stuff to the cloud. So you need to make sure to have the right tooling in place that always evaluate your Terraform state and Terraform HCL configuration against the real actual deployment on your cloud. There is few projects that can help you to do that. And I think the most important tip that I have here today is just treat your infrastructure as code the same as any other code. And the meaning is that if you have a very good CI/CD pipeline with reviews and static code analysis and linters and scanners and all of the good stuff that you can put in the shift left in the CI, just make sure to have them also in your infrastructure as code. For example, there is a great project for security scanning like TFScan and Checkov. There is a very good project that even can give you a cost projection like Infra-as-code. So just make sure that you put all of those stuff, even for your Terraform code or the other infrastructure as code language. And also don't forget about getting your peer reviewing and approving your pull request. And this is something that we are tend to be more loose with that state of mind. But from my experience, once we became more mature with understanding that infrastructure as code is just like another code, we see how the quality become much, much better over time. So if I would like to conclude all the stuff that I mentioned here, and I think if you take not all of those items, only few of them, and you implement them in your journey, you will be with a very successful point and you will have a better experience using infrastructure as code. Thank you very much. I will be available for any other question after the talk. Thank you and see you again.